So I want to jump straight into it, John, because I'm sure that there's lots to get through. So the first question, there's two questions. One's from Makeda McKenzie. Now she's the founder and principal consultant at the Caribbean Mindfulness Institute. And she's saying, hey John, thanks for the opportunity. I'd like to know your thoughts on if and how mindfulness can help us cultivate a sense of hope in the midst of all this tragedy. And I'll combine that with Vera Bakun's question, how can I be happy when there's so much suffering? Right, so the idea of tragedy and suffering, but how can we cultivate a sense of hope, and how can we be happy when there's so much suffering?
These are really profound human questions, and they go back forever in human history, because there's always been suffering, and there's always been loss, and there's always been grief. And what mindfulness is about is, in some sense, not having our own experience be completely dominated by the conditions that we find ourselves in, because the conditions will always create suffering in one way or another. It's just part of the nature of life that there is suffering. That does not mean, as is often misunderstood in the Buddhist tradition, people think that the Buddha said life is suffering. He's not saying life is suffering. He's saying there is suffering. That is a fundamental actuality of life. And it is possible to transform one's relationship to that suffering and liberate oneself from it. Not just for oneself, for one's small sense of self or ego or I, but for all beings, for everybody that we are connected with. And in fact, we are connected with everybody. So when it comes to hope, a hope is actually something that has to do with the possibility for a future moment that's better than this one. But if you are in this moment in a way that's in some sense independent from the causes and conditions and not attached to it, then you're already the embodiment of hope. By not losing your mind when you most need it, that's really hopeful, not just for yourself, but for anybody around you, because if you lose your mind, then of course you compound the suffering.
Yeah.
So that's a practice that we can actually engage in, not to cling to hope or try to reify or build some kind of artificial thought-based hope, but to actually recognize the beauty of the sunrise, the beauty of the night sky, the beauty of a look on your child's face that has no idea what a pandemic is and that we need to protect.
Yeah.
The sadness when a child can't go to school and wants to go to school, and we hold that kind of challenge in awareness in a way that doesn't minimize her suffering or, her disorientation or sense of sadness or cut off possibility. And our nurturance, our recognition of that suffering actually is healing. Hope and happiness are in some sense related. We're hoping for some better circumstances in some future moment. And this is a big problem with happiness, because we always want to be happy now, but something always seems to be in the way. And what's in the way is the present circumstances. If only things were different, I would be happy. So let's like turn the tables on that and say, well, if I could be just happy right now, independent of the causes and conditions, what would happiness mean? It wouldn't mean, in the people dying from COVID-19. It wouldn't be like, I'm happy. I've got my house. I've got my roof over my head. I've got plenty of food or whatever. It's much more in this moment. Can I experience some degree of well-being, equanimity, embodied presence, open-hearted spaciousness to hold whatever is arising in my experience, inwardly and outwardly, And then you're already, in some sense, a sense of a center of equanimity. Then the immediate question would be, well, how can I help? In other words, it doesn't have to be, as you started out talking about me. And the more you get out of your own head and desire for happiness, actually, the happier you are. And the more you can be of use to other people, the more profoundly satisfying that is, because one of the sort of cardinal experiences of human satisfaction is a deep sense of interconnectedness, which we're all seeing now in the pandemic, because it doesn't have any preferences for one country or another country, or healthy people versus poor people, or anything like that. It's just like an equal opportunity destroyer, so to speak. The virus just recognizes humans and then attacks us. And so we need to, in some sense, not take that even personally, even though, the laws are horrible, but in a certain way, inquire as to what is most profoundly meaningful for us. And in my experience, from my own life experience, what's most profoundly meaningful to me and the people I know is a sense of being connected with each other and with some larger whole that, to a large degree, like mysterious. And we don't know how it's all going to unfold. But if we tilt things in the direction of not trying to grasp for some thing that privileges me over everybody else, so that at least I escape, or at least I live a long life, or at least my family is protected, then I think, and we all engage in that more or less, and our governments support that more or less, then I think we'll develop a kind of resilience and even resistance to the kinds of human generated problems that cause suffering. So it's not a philosophy. This is where it grounds itself in the meditation practice in this moment. Am I grasping for something that I don't have? Or pushing away something that I really, really, really don't want? Or can I, just for this moment, maintain a certain sense of open-hearted spaciousness where all of this stuff is actually arising in thought? And it's freighted with emotions of one kind or another, often very frightening emotions. And so that's how we easily lose our way or our balance. We haven't trained the mind to actually recognize that this is what the mind does, and that we can actually drop in to a space that's not about happiness, but more about wisdom. Right in this moment, not like, let me read 10 books or, whatever, study with all these teachers, but right now, how could I actually act in such a way? And sometimes that's by not doing anything, just being a forceful presence, just by being present in a room or in the family. How can I act in such a way that in this moment holds the space in ways that have integrity, even in the face of fear, the fear of the future, the fear of the unknown, and even in the face of sadness and grief and loss? Now, that doesn't mean we won't cry and pull our hair out and, rant and everything else. I mean, we're humans. But it means that even that will hold in awareness in a way that it won't be, as you started out talking about, all about my grief, my suffering, without recognizing that the grief and the suffering are just like, at this particular moment, much more clearly than usual, global. And yes, it's also true. A lot of people are suffering more because they're more vulnerable. If you've lost your job, as over 25 million people have in my country in 4 weeks, and you don't have an income and you don't have food, meanwhile, farmers are dumping milk and plowing food into the ground because there's no societal way to get it to them, although maybe we're going to find an out-of-the-box imaginative solution to that one. I don't know. This stuff is so in play at the moment. But when you're no longer just caught in self-centeredness, then that's freedom right now, even in the face of the unwanted or the horrific. Again, I keep coming back to this. At the time that we most need to not lose our minds, it's really helpful if we know how to either not lose our minds in very stressful situations, or notice how quickly we can lose our minds, which is more the case for almost all of us, and then quickly bring ourselves back, recover, reground ourselves. Because it doesn't help anybody when we go off the deep end and just lose our minds to fear. So the happiness and the hope, they're never not present. They're in each one of us, but not in the ways that can be completely understood through thinking. We have to live our way into what Aristotle called eudaimonia, sort of, and that's, as I was saying, independent of outer conditions or even the storms in one's own mind, because the awareness that can hold the outer conditions and that can hold the storms in one's own mind, that awareness is not lost, frightened, or despairing. In fact, it's the best tool we have for maintaining sanity, clarity, and navigating the ups and downs of the very real challenges we face every single day in our lives.